Before sunrise, a black SUV tore down Sarah Jensen's dirt road, gravel spitting under its tires. 4 men stormed the land, smashing her greenhouse, spilling grain into the mud, and yanking her arm like she was nothing. The leader, reeking of whiskey, grinned as he threatened to take everything worth keeping. Neighbors slowed to watch, but no one stepped in. They thought she'd just take it like everyone else, but Sarah wasn't just another farmer, and the gang was about to learn why fear can change sides. Morning in Harper County came with the sound of roosters and the slow hum of tractors in the distance. For most people, that meant another day of tending to the land, but for some, it meant watching the road, hoping the wrong set of tires didn't crunch over the gravel. Sarah Jensen, 68 years old, walked the length of her corn rows with a burlap sack slung over one shoulder. Her silver hair caught the light in thin strands, and her face was lined not by weakness, but by years of sun, wind, and stubborn survival. She kept to herself, moving in deliberate steps, her hands calloused from decades of soil and hard work. In the distance, a low rumble, not the familiar beat-up pickups her neighbors drove. This was heavier, louder, and too fast for these roads. Sarah paused, one hand resting on a fence post. Dust kicked up in the air as a black SUV slowed to a crawl right at her gate. 3 men stepped out. They weren't dressed like farmers. Black leather vests, heavy boots, and that lazy kind of grin that told you they didn't need to run to catch what they wanted. One leaned against the hood, chewing a toothpick. The tallest one strolled up, boots crunching on gravel. He spoke slow, but his eyes were scanning her land like it was already his. "Farm dues," he said, voice flat. "Everyone pays. Keeps accidents from happening." Sarah didn't argue. She didn't flinch. She just turned, walked to her porch, and came back with an envelope. The money was ready as if she had expected this visit. She handed it over without a word. From across the road, 2 neighbors, Mr. Smith and his wife, were half hidden behind their mailbox. "Poor thing," Mrs. Smith whispered. "She won't last a month with them circling." Mr. Smith grunted. She should have stood up to him. Paying once just paints a target. Sarah could hear every word. She didn't look their way, just kept her eyes on the dust cloud as the SUV pulled off, leaving a trail across her once clear morning. Back inside her house, the smell of strong coffee filled the small kitchen. She poured herself a mug, sat by the window, and stared out over her land. From the outside, it looked like she was just thinking, but inside, every detail of those men, how they walked, where their hands rested, the angle of their boots, was already stored in her mind. She'd seen that kind of arrogance before overseas, in places where the wrong look could cost you your life. But here she wasn't a soldier. She was just another farmer, and for now, she'd play that role. 2 weeks passed. The summer heat settled heavy over Harper County, pressing down like a wet blanket. Flies clung to anything that didn't move, and the air smelled faintly of dry soil and diesel from the tractors, still fighting to get a harvest out of tired land. Sarah kept to her rhythm. Up before dawn, feed the chickens, water the rows, patch whatever the wind or rain had torn loose. It was a life built on predictability, and she liked it that way, but predictability had a habit of drawing wolves. On a Wednesday morning, before the sun even bled into the horizon, that black SUV came back. This time, it didn't roll in slow. It tore down the dirt road like it owned it. Gravel rattled against her porch steps as 4 men piled out, voices loud, movement sloppy from whatever they'd been drinking. They didn't knock. They didn't ask. They went straight to the greenhouse, the laughter turning sharp when the first pane of glass shattered under a boot. Sarah was by the chicken coop when she heard it, a sound that makes the skin at the back of your neck tighten. She walked toward it, calm but steady, her boots pressing down into the dirt with a measured weight. 1 man had ripped open her feed sacks, spilling grain into the mud. Another was tossing seedling trays into the grass like they were trash. The tallest, the same one who took her envelope last time, spotted her and grinned. "Morning, farmer," he said, stepping toward her. "We figured your dues didn't quite cover all this prime land." From the gravel road, a pickup slowed down. Two men inside, neighbors from 3 farms over, watched but didn't get out. One of them muttered something, and though Sarah couldn't hear the words, she could read the shame in their eyes. They drove on. The gang leader's hand shot out, gripping her arm. His fingers dug deep, and the smell of whiskey hit her nose. "You got more in that house," he said. "Let's go get it." Sarah didn't pull away. She didn't blink. Inside her, something ancient and trained flickered awake. The old instincts she'd buried under years of planting and harvest. But on the surface, she was still the quiet farmer. They left that morning with what they could carry: tools, a sack of potatoes, and the satisfaction of thinking they'd humiliated her. But they didn't see the way she stood at the edge of her porch as they drove off, her coffee untouched on the rail, her eyes tracking every move. Back in town, gossip was already spinning. "You hear about Sarah?" someone whispered in the hardware store. "She should move." "Old lady can't take on that crew," another replied. And in a quiet corner booth of the diner, an older man shook his head. "Don't count her out. I've seen that look before." Sarah walked into the feed store later that day, the murmur of conversation stopping for just a second too long. She paid for her supplies in cash, thanked the clerk, and left without a smile. Her mind wasn't in that store. It was already on the next move. The gang thought they'd taught her a lesson. They had no idea they'd just signed up for one of their own. That night, the farmhouse was silent, but Sarah wasn't sleeping. She sat at her kitchen table under the dim yellow light, an old metal coffee can pushed aside to make room for a neatly folded map. Her calloused fingers traced the lines of her land, every fence post, every gate, every natural choke point burned into memory. Out in the dark, the wind pushed through the corn rows, carrying the faint creak of her weathered barn door. Most people wouldn't notice, but she heard it. She heard everything. On the floor beside her, a small wooden chest sat open. Inside wasn't cash or jewelry, just a few worn tools from a life most in Harper County didn't know she'd lived. A coil of paracord, a folding knife with a faded seal emblem on the handle, a battered compass, and a single black and white photo of her in uniform, smiling against the deck of a Navy ship. She moved like she was back on base, efficient, deliberate, no wasted motion. Fishing line became tripwires. Empty tin cans, washed and strung, became low alarms. The old pitchfork leaning against the barn wall was cleaned and set near the back door. By dawn, the traps were set. A faint scent of oil lingered in the air where she'd checked the hinges on her gates and reinforced the latch on her tool shed. Her muscles remembered the work, even if years had passed since she needed them for anything more than farming. 2 days later, they came back. Same SUV, same careless swagger. Sarah stood in her yard, back straight, hands loose at her sides like she was just another helpless old farmer. The first man hopped the fence and dropped instantly, his legs tangled in a snare hidden under loose straw. His yelp cut short when he hit the dirt, staring up at her boots. The second tried the side path. He didn't see the fishing lines strung low across the gate. The snap of the line set off a cascade of tin cans, their clatter cutting through the quiet morning like an alarm bell. By the time he looked up, she was there, one arm sweeping his weapon away, the other shoving him back hard enough to drop him to his knees. The rest froze, unsure whether to run or fight, but it didn't matter. Sarah wasn't chasing them. She was hurting them, guiding their panic exactly where she wanted it to go, toward the sheriff's yard. It wasn't rage on her face. It was control, and that made it worse. When the dust cleared, 2 were bound and bruised by her barn. Another limped away without his jacket, and the last sat on the sheriff's porch, too stunned to speak. Sarah walked home slow, the sun rising behind her. To the rest of Harper County, it might have looked like she'd just defended her farm, but for those men, it was the day they learned the difference between a victim and a veteran. By the time the sheriff's truck rolled up, the scene on Sarah's property looked like something out of a war film. 2 gang members sat in the dirt, wrists bound tight with paracord, their leather vests streaked with mud. Another limped toward the main road, clutching his ribs, muttering curses under his breath. The sheriff, broad-shouldered, sweat beading under his hat, took one look at the setup, and let out a low whistle. "Sarah, you want to tell me what happened here?" She just shrugged, wiping her hands on the hem of her faded work shirt. "Just protecting what's mine." Word spread before the sheriff even loaded the men into his truck. At the feed store, old Mr. Smith leaned over the counter and whispered, "You hear about Jensen? Took down the gang herself." Mrs. Smith, stocking goods nearby, shook her head. "I thought she was just quiet." "Quiet," he muttered. "Don't mean weak." By noon, half the county had heard. At the diner, conversations dipped when she walked in. A few men tipped their hats. One young farmhand, barely out of high school, blurted, "Ma'am, that was something." He looked like he wanted to say more but thought better of it. That evening, the sun sank low, washing her fields in a golden haze. Sarah sat on her porch, boots propped on the railing, a mug of black coffee in her hand. Across the dirt road, a group of neighbors stood by the fence, people who had once kept their distance, now lingering like they wanted to say something. Finally, Mrs. Smith stepped forward. We should have helped you," she said, her voice wavering. "We were scared." Sarah took a sip, her eyes on the horizon. "Fear is normal," she said. "Letting it decide for you, that's the mistake." From then on, no one whispered about her in pity. The gang was gone, packed up and out of Harper County before the week was over. Whether it was fear of her or shame from the sheriff's arrest, nobody knew, but the respect was clear. Neighbors brought over fresh pie, helped mend her fences, and even stopped by just to talk. Sarah didn't seek the attention. She didn't need it. She'd been a protector before, half a world away, and she would have been one here with or without an audience. As the cicadas buzzed in the warm night air, she leaned back in her chair, the weight of the day settling into her bones. Harper County was quiet again, and this time, it wasn't because the people were scared. Some battles aren't fought on foreign soil. They're fought in our own backyards. And sometimes the quietest neighbor is the one who can turn the tide.